So Joe Biden, when he's screaming about effectively Hitler, we got to keep him out of the White House, he's communicating with that prosecutor. He's communicating with his Democrat judges. He's communicating with his attorney general. He doesn't have to pick up the phone. He's telling them and the whole world, keep this man out of the Oval Office. He's Hitler. I want to delve deeply into this issue of whether you can indict a former president for actions he's alleged to have taken while he was president and while he's running again for president of the United States. We've never confronted anything like this because prosecutors have never put this country in this position before. And they're trampling all over the traditions and the precedents that we're familiar with in this country to create new law and really to destroy this republic going forward. So we're in this very difficult position. A couple of things to put this in context. And I know why you're here, because you're not going to hear this anywhere else. And that's what I try to bring to you, my knowledge, what I know about what takes place. Number one, there were two memos issued by two different attorneys general of two different administrations and two different parties. And in both, may actually have been three, but at least the two I remember, they said to prosecutors, do not take steps that may interfere with an election. Attorney General Mukasey was one of them. The other one may well have been the current Attorney General or a prior Democrat Attorney General. So they were supposed to be mindful of these sorts of things. Obviously, that has been completely trampled. That whole notion's been eviscerated, and now the door's been thrown wide open. Who cares if there's an election or not? If you want to bring charges against a candidate, bring charges. And of course, Donald Trump is the leading candidate for the nomination at this time. And this is bad news. Number two, Joe Biden's been running around the country now like a mental patient in an asylum in a padded room, screaming at the top of his lungs about fascism, dictatorship, suggesting that Trump is Hitler, as his campaign has encouraged and as the media have. And that's what they did to Goldwater, as we've talked about, and they did it to Nixon and Reagan, and now they're doing it to Trump. Everybody's Hitler, so nobody's Hitler. And they're accusing you of being brown shirts, that is, stormtroopers for Trump if you support Trump, but they would accuse of being stormtroopers for DeSantis. It wouldn't matter, because we're up against this American Marxist agenda and ideology. So that's number two. But number three, what kind of precedent would it actually be if the Constitution, according to these judges, allows a prosecutor to charge a former president, number one, for actions he took while president, number two, and who's running for election again, number three? And again, as I said, this has all been teed up as a result of what Merrick Garland, the Department of Justice, and this rogue prosecutor, Jack Smith, have decided to do, with, I might add, the imprimatur of the district court, Judge Chunin, an Obama appointee and a radical leftist. Now, there's a three-judge panel on the circuit court in Washington, D.C. The panels hear the cases typically first, but not always. And it was loaded with the usual reprobates, two of whom are left-wing Democrats, one of whom was a George H.W. Bush appointee, Henderson, who's about 80 years old. P-A-N, was asking most of the questions. And as Julie Kelly has written extensively, she's a radical leftist. Her husband was one of the main accusers against Brett Kavanaugh with the lies about what he did in school and so forth, and gang rapes and all the rest of it. He was one of the first to come forward and go to the FBI. This just shows you the extent of their radicalism and their activism. And she gets on the court in Washington, D.C., the appellate court. She's appointed by Joe Biden. She flies pretty much through the Senate with the help and support of the likes of a Lindsey Graham. And so she's sitting there this week, yesterday, grilling Trump's attorney, and she says, well, let me ask you a question. If President Trump, as president, had ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent, could be indicted for that? And so, of course, to use these absurd examples, these absurd hypotheticals about something that will never, ever occur, is intended to lay a trap. And yet I listened to this, and I played some of it on radio last night, and I thought to myself, well, isn't she proving our point? He didn't do that. He's not charged with insurrection. He's not charged with sedition. In fact, nobody's been charged with insurrection. Indeed, Donald Trump hasn't even been charged with an act of criminal violence. He's been charged under the Klan Act, under the Enron Obstruction Act, and he's been charged with under a federal contractors law. And in terms of this Enron obstruction, the Supreme Court has taken it up, and guess who was one of the judges on another panel, 2-1, Democrats, who ruled that statute can be used against the January 6 protesters, which is outrageous in my view, the same Judge Pan. Julie Kelly points out the appointment of these circuit judges to these panels to hear these cases is supposed to be sort of a lottery system. And yet Pan seems to wind up on more of these panels that directly affect January 6 and Donald Trump than any other circuit judge. Her suggestion is there's something that smells here, and there is. So Pan is a radical leftist. Her husband is a radical leftist. They are Democrat activists, and now she's a circuit court judge. And she has ruled consistently and gone out of her way to twist the law and rule consistently against the January 6 protesters. I'm not talking about the violent rioters, the protesters. And she's ruled consistently against Donald Trump on issues of privilege and other issues as she sits on these panels. And she was the most aggressive inquisitor when it came to this issue of immunity the other day, when she was hearing the case. So you can see how this works. Chunin was a big Obama advocate. She's the district court judge. The head of the district court, Hal, she used to work on Leahy's staff on Capitol Hill. She was appointed by Obama, and she ruled on motions including denying Donald Trump attorney-client privilege and due process. Chunin has ruled similarly and further denied Donald Trump his Sixth Amendment right, that is, effective representation to counsel, because of the way she has truncated this case in 5 months' time before the election, which is on hold now because the Supreme Court at least is considering taking a look at it. Then you go to the circuit court, which has been populated with radicals. When Obama was president, he increased the number of circuit court judges by 3. And he did that with Harry Reid when they controlled the Senate. So they added 3 judges, and every one of those judges was appointed by Obama at the time. So they completely skewed the D.C. Circuit Court, which is more like the old Ninth Circuit Court now. And not just Democrat appointees, radical judges. And Biden is doing the same thing. I'm sure he doesn't even know their name. His staff is pushing it because he's filled with Obama retrograde type staff over there at the White House. So that's the setup. That's the setup. So the question, so that's why this is brought, that's why this is a court issue. Pan and the other Democrats moved up the oral argument date, which is so rare, unless there's really a national security or some other type of emergency, in this argument, to try and play the campaign calendar the way Chunin has and the way Jack Smith and the Department of Justice have. They ruled up the oral argument so they could issue a quick ruling and hope that it gets to the Supreme Court as fast as possible in time to affect the outcome of the election. This is as bad as it gets. Now, Judge Henderson, again, appointed by Bush 41, she objected to the manner in which this hearing was set up, that there was a sprint to put it on the calendar. I mean, there's a lot of issues these judges, whether the district judges or appellate judges, are supposed to be hearing. And as I listened to what Pan was saying and some of the questioning of Donald Trump's lawyer, she asked this ridiculous SEAL Team 6 assassination hypothetical. And when Trump's lawyer was trying to explain it may have a relationship to first you impeach and you don't, she said, wait, I need a yes or no answer. You don't get yes or no answers at the appellate court. You don't get yes or no answers at the Supreme Court. That's the kind of stuff you get perhaps at the district court level when you're questioning a witness or when a judge wants a specific answer to a specific issue. But when you're dealing with a first impression constitutional case that can affect the election of the president and the future of the presidency, You don't get yes or no answers. And you don't ask complicated questions for the purpose of trying to trick, in this case, the plaintiff who's bringing this case, or the appellant of the lower court case. But that's the way Pond plays the game. And so Trump's lawyers go in there and they say basically there's blanket immunity to an ex-president who's made decisions as president, who's being charged as a result of those decisions he made as president. And so all the media are saying, this is crazy, it goes too far. And media, including some of the conservative legal analysts out there. So my question to you, does it go too far? Let's work this through as a practical matter. You're president of the United States and you have to make some decisions. Some of them are complicated and difficult. Some of them involve life or death. Some of them have to be made in seconds' time. So if you're able to indict a former president, an ex-president, for actions that person took when he was president of the United States, doesn't that create several problems on its face? Just as a practical matter. Isn't that president going to be constantly wondering if what he is doing will subject him to prosecution by an administration that comes in subsequently and is an administration of the party opposite? Of a Department of Justice that's filled with radicals? Of a Department of Justice that's looking for a way to punish that former president, or in this case, to prevent that former president from getting elected president? I mean, after all, they're calling him Hitler. So Joe Biden, when he's screaming about, effectively, Hitler, we got to keep him out of the White House, he's communicating with that prosecutor. He's communicating with his Democrat judges. He's communicating with his attorney general. He doesn't have to pick up the phone. He's telling them and the whole world, keep this man out of the Oval Office. He's Hitler. He will destroy our country. He's dangerous. A conga line of Democrats. The two Obamas are saying it. All over TV they're saying it. Their media are saying it. It is your righteous duty, your patriotic duty, to convict Trump, and better yet, get him in prison and do it as quickly as possible before the election. That is the message, among others, that Joe Biden is sending to federal law enforcement, to the federal judiciary. Stop Hitler. He doesn't have to say it in quiet. He doesn't have to be found to have conspired. He's making it clear. He's also doing what? Tainting the jury pool in every one of these cities. And we're talking about inner cities. Whether it's New York, whether it's Atlanta, whether it's Washington, D.C. He's communicating to his voters because these cities are overwhelmingly Democrat. Stop Trump. It's your duty. He is tainting the jury pool. He's giving directions, effectively, to Jack Smith and to his boss, Merrick Garland. He's communicating effectively with trial judges and appellate judges and Democrats on the Supreme Court. Stop Hitler. Our democracy is at stake.
For more, sign up for Levin TV.